It's another How I Lead episode where we go somewhere in the universe and interview a leader and simply ask them, how is it that you lead? And today we're going to the mystical land of Shawnee, Kansas to talk with Jodi Atkinson, and a big shout out to Stacy DeWitt, I think I'm saying your name right, who submitted and nominated Jodi to be on the How I Lead series here. This is how we do it, guys. It's not like I have a directory of all the best leaders in the church. We need your help. You got to, identify these people and go to leadingsaints.org/contact and let us know so we can reach out. Plus, I really need to get ahead of schedule on how I lead interviews. And so we're making progress there, but, it really helped me. So help me, help you. Help you, help me. Okay. All right. So Jodi has a phenomenal background, and as a Stake Young Women's president, some of these principles are just so helpful. This is one you'll want to share around, not just with Stake Young Women's presidents, but also with Ward Young Women's presidents, youth leaders, even young men leaders can benefit from some of Jodi's guidance. Everything from how she engages the youth, allowing them to lead, but in a very specific way with engaging them through counsels. I thought was just so fantastic. And building relationships with, obviously on a stake level, she was constantly focusing on building relationships with the youth leaders in the wards, right? And then finally, man, this last principle, I'll read it here, give you a sneak peek. The Lord does not ask us to serve so he can deplete us, test us, or for us to prove ourselves. And the way she talks about how she invited Christ into this experience so that it was a sanctifying experience, how she surrendered the outcome to Christ, that he's going to go the extra mile to reach all the individuals that need to be reached. It was just so inspiring, the quotes, the scripture she shares. So let's get into it. Here is my interview with Jodi Atkinson from Shawnee, Kansas. All right, Jodi Atkinson, you've been nominated for a How I Lead episode. How do you feel about that?
Oh, a little surprised.
Yeah?
And yeah, nominated is it's a good way to put it. I talked to my friend that nominated me, and I said, "You are tricky."
Nice. And that's Stacy, right?
Yes, Stacy.
We'll give a shout out to Stacy.
So. Yes, Stacy DeWitt is a friend, and also we serve together. And she's a Ward Young Women's president now, so she's like, "I just want to hear what you have to say." So I'm like, "All right, well, I'll try to do my best for Stacy and everybody." But yeah.
So what you're saying is maybe we should interview Stacy after this.
Maybe
okay.
So.
All right. Very good. Yeah, Stacy sent me an email. She said, I want to suggest someone for the podcast. Jodi Atkinson served as our Stake Young Women's president and was the kind of exceptional mentor that Dan Duckworth talks about. He's on our board and former guest. She was constantly telling the young women leaders of the stake, the youth are not a problem to be solved. They are the solution. She would be an awesome addition to your How I Lead series. So that's one of your principles we'll get into. But
yes.
So are you still serving in this position?
I'm not. I was released in August of 2024, so just this past summer.
Okay.
And I'm currently teaching primary. So
nice.
Yeah, I had kind of switched back to this thought track, but I'm excited to kind of expound on some of the things I learned. So
yeah. And how long did you serve in this role?
Just a little over 3 years.
Okay. That's a good amount of time to do a few girls' camps and activities like that. So awesome. And you're in, is it Shawnee, Kansas?
Yes. In Shawnee, Kansas. It's the Lenexa, Kansas stake.
Okay. And how would you describe like the layout of the stake or demographics of it all? Anything unique there?
Yeah, I feel like our stake is pretty unique because it takes in some city areas, it takes in some rural areas, but I feel like we're also close enough that it was easy to gather our stake. I could get from building to building in 20 minutes. It wasn't, I know there's some stakes in our area where they're driving an hour or more to get to different buildings and do different things, but I feel like we were close and close-knit. We were close to stakes that were also bordering us, so we did a lot of multi-stake activities, and we have a lot of different school districts. We have a Spanish ward in our stake, which was also a really cool experience to kind of interact with them, and a lot of different life experiences, political views. Like there was a lot of different aspects of people in this area, and that's what makes Kansas City a beautiful place too.
Love it. Awesome. And so what do you remember just from the the first year of the three, or just the first week of the 3 years, just getting started in this? Did your mind go one direction or the other, or what was the vision in the beginning?
So it was a really, I feel like, an interesting and unique time to be called to this because it was May of 2021
Hmm.
and it was still like the throes of COVID. Nothing had really picked up again. The youth program had kind of been laid out in the fall of 2019, and then here comes COVID in 2020, and everything shuts down. And then even in 2021, it kind of felt like not a lot had been implemented,
Hmm.
and there weren't stake dances happening. We were still masked at church. There was still wards not holding activities, and so it was. I feel like it was hard in a lot of ways, but it was unique because it gave me the chance to kind of start over. Like the landscape of all of our lives changed at that time, in the world, health wise, in the church, new programs, all these things being rolled out. And so it was a good time to kind of like, all right, well, where do we start? Where do we begin? There was nothing that precedented anything that we were trying to do. And so we just went to like handbooks and we went back to the talks that were given when the youth program was laid out, and we just thought, well, how do we do this? And it was good exercise for me to think outside the box,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is essential in leading youth and where we're at right now. And in the program is we had to think outside the box. How do we gather them? Do we gather them? What does it look like? What do they need? And we had to really kind of start from scratch. And with COVID also slowly easing up, it took time, but a lot of practice. I think one thing I learned is that we can't function in absolutes. We had to
Hmm.
function kind of in a process and patterns. Okay, what pattern? What's the purpose of this? What's the purpose of activities? What's the purpose of gathering? And what patterns can we kind of lean on to kind of get things going again without it looking like it did before? And what can it look like now? And how can we grow? So it was a
Yeah.
lot at first.
Yeah. And I appreciate just that. I mean, COVID sort of forced that on you, but just having that, clean slate mentality coming into this, because it's
Hmm.
so easy to sort of default. Well, what was the last presidency doing? And we should probably just do a little bit of the same or a lot of the same, but to
Yeah.
really go back to what's the handbooks, what are the programs, what are the talks that were given, and saying, if we knew nothing before this, how would we execute from going forward? Right.
Yeah, and it was a good time to question things because I feel like we, just because it had been done before, did it need to be done again? And it was
Mm-hmm.
kind of a weird year of like trying to fit old and new things together, where I was
Yeah.
like, oh, this is a lot of trial and error. And what's interesting is going into like the youth guidebook. This had just come out, and what are we wanting the youth to think about? And it had in there, they discover something, they plan something, they act on it, and they reflect on it. That's part of their goals and their process or their pattern, right? Of like, what is it I'm trying to discover? All right, let's plan it, let's do it, now let's reflect on it. I feel like we did a lot of that, especially the first year, because we found that a lot of old things were still trying to fit into new things. And how could we kind of try this out? Okay, how can we refine this again? How can we reflect on this? And I'm grateful for all the patience people around us had and the youth had, because there was a lot of trying new things and letting go of old ways and picking up new ways. And so the first year kind of felt like this grind, and then as we kind of got going more and more, it eased up and got easier, and we caught more vision and more need for our stake. And but it was kind of tricky at first and messy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And anything else as far as just starting this calling that you want to make sure we mention before we move on?
I don't know. I didn't expect this calling. My husband and I were going in to be released as seminary teachers, and
Oh, wow.
before I knew it, the whole stake presidency had come in, and I was like, what is happening? And they're like, oh, we would like to call you now to be the stake young women's president. And my husband just kind of looked at me like, go you, I was like, all right, let's do this. And it was overwhelming, but it was amazing to me how I immediately kind of felt ideas and had the spirit and just felt like it's going to be okay. Just try, just
Hmm.
try, just
Hmm.
move forward a step at a time and just try. So
Yeah. Well, let's jump into the principles that you sent me. As I do, I
sure.
had to prepare three leadership principles that came to mind that served you well during your time. And the first one, which alludes to what Stacy mentioned when she submitted your name, but the youth are not a problem to be solved, but where we should go to counsel together in love and find answers. Expound on that.
Okay, so I feel like this is something I kind of came to as I served and as I learned as I went along, because first thing that I learned is I loved councils. I loved counseling. I loved like hearing ideas and discussing things, and we would talk a lot about how like revelation is scattered among us, and how do we ask a lot of questions, how do we reach out, how do we counsel, and where do we counsel, and how do we find the right answers for this situation. And what's really cool that I didn't realize, being called in a state calling, is we're able to have like a general training. So we had a general training from the General Young Women's Board, and we had a Zoom, and it was a whole bunch of stakes on there, and we got to be taught by them. And one thing that they said that just always stuck with me, and I thought about it a lot, because so many questions come up, issues come up, struggles come up. What do I do about this? What do I do about that? And they said, when something like that comes up, what counsel do you take it to? And I thought about that a lot, and I was like, okay, well, that's a good place to start. Do I counsel with parents? Do I counsel with the bishop? Do I counsel with my presidency? Do I counsel with the World Young Women's President? And so I kind of discovered the power of councils, and I just loved learning. And then as we kind of went along, I think we were in like an SYLC meeting, which is like the stake youth leadership committee. It's all the adults in the stake who are youth leaders. And we were discussing an activity, and we kind of came around to the conclusion, like, why are we trying to imagine this activity from our point of view? Why don't we try to imagine this activity from the youth's point of view? Like, how are they experiencing it? What do they really care about? And the more I kind of started on that thought track, I noticed like things around me where it was just like, I feel like we're a bunch of adults running around trying to find answers to a youth program that is the youth's program. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times when words would come to us, or we'd be in trainings and they'd have a question or something come up, and I finally got to the point where it was like, well, have you counseled with your youth in your class presidency? Have you asked that council this question? Our youth are just too busy. Okay, Have you asked them how they feel about that? How do they feel about being busy? How does that impact their day? How do these meetings impact their time? And what are their solutions, right? What are their solutions to these struggles that we as adults are trying to solve without their input? And so it really, I found more and more that that's what I kept saying was, all right, well, have you counseled with your class presidency? Have you asked your class president what she thinks about this? And really bringing that calling to the forefront of like, these young women are called, they are set apart, they have that priesthood authority in their lives to act on these ideas and to receive revelation for that. And I'm not the person that can answer this question for you, but this is where you can go to counsel about that and find the answer and help the youth help you help them. Yeah. It's just really, and I found that was, when it came down to most things, that is where most of the solutions were. And I feel like we kind of are in our adult headspace and our adult experiences, and we kind of get wrapped up in those things, and we forget that we need to see it from their perspective, and we need to ask them, okay, I can't be frustrated about these situations. I need to now look to these youth as the ones who are called and set apart to solve these problems and answer these questions and to receive revelation for themselves. So
yeah. And often the phrase that's used more commonly now is letting the youth lead, right? And people sort of fall on different parts of that spectrum. Some say, well, I just surrender it all to the youth, and this activity might not go as great, but they're learning. And others are saying, no, it's more like a mentorship and things like that. But I guess where my mind goes with this is that sometimes we interpret that as like, to let them lead, they need to be in charge of all the activities or the lessons or whatever it is. When in reality, letting them lead, I feel like at the core, what you're getting at is, let's have them have a place at the table in the room as we're discussing the plans, or get some discussion going that way and see where the revelation is at, and having them involved there, regardless if they do end up spearheading whatever activity they come up with, or maybe the leader kind of steps in more, for this or that activity, but nonetheless, it came from that council that was led by the youth, right?
Yeah. And I think a lot of us as adults, or our former experiences, or even our former experiences as leaders with older programs, I think it's really hard for us to work out of a checklist mentality. And the checklist makes us feel really good and really safe, and like we're accomplishing something. And I think, for me, I felt like, for the youth, it's kind of like it's not a prescription. It's a process. And if it feels messy, you're probably doing it right. And you're probably just need to keep coming back and keep trying and keep and working on this with the youth. Because for me, and we got down to this idea at a few trainings where I just said, like, what does it actually mean to be youth led? What does that actually look like? Does that mean they teach all the lessons? Does that mean that they brought the cookies for the activity and didn't forget and were responsible? Does that mean that they are doing things the way we think they should do them? And for me, I felt like what my presidency and I came down to is like being truly youth led is them feeling like they're seen and heard, like this program is for them, like it's addressing their concerns, that it's making them feel like it's helping them come closer to Christ and they have a part in that and they can feel that and that you're working with them and alongside them. And it's so easy. And I have a youth that said to me once, she's like, it's so interesting because I feel like the leaders want me to teach all the lessons and I don't feel like I know how to teach, but yet they don't want to listen to me about what I want to do for girls camp. It's kind of like we have some things flip flop sometimes where it's like,
Interesting.
well, what are their capacity? Where are they at? And how can you help them build on the building blocks that they're ready for? Some youth aren't ready to teach lesson all by themselves. Some youth love to bake and will be more than happy to bring cookies. Some youth are so busy that maybe all they can do is show up. And we talked a lot about involving youth in God's work of salvation and exaltation, which if any calling you have in the church, that's where it begins, is you go to learn about my calling, and it's God's work of salvation and exaltation, where you live, care, invite, unite. Everybody starts there, and that's where the youth start. And we talked about like the different pillars of the youth program. You have the personal development, you have the goals. So this is on top of the foundation, right? You have service and activities, so your weekly activities, your camps, different things. And then you have gospel learning, which is like, seminary, come follow me, different things like that. And so we kind of built this house out of this idea where you have a foundation, you have these pillars, and on top of that is a roof where all the youth can be gathered in. We're wanting to gather in everybody, and that includes the youth, that includes the leaders, that includes our friends. And so we kind of tried to structure it that way, where it's like, we're not asking the youth to build this house by themselves. We're asking them to participate with us and helping them grow where they're at. And really, to understand how to help the youth do that, you have to have a good relationship with them. So you know what to ask them to do. You know what's uncomfortable for them. They know that you've heard them and that you acted on something that they said. And that makes all the difference in making them feel like, oh, I am a leader. I am participating. This is my program, and my leader is here to help me do that.
Are there any specific stories that come to mind as far as what that looked like in action?
Yeah, so I wrote down a few. One example that came to mind was Young Women's Camp. So in our area, we've traditionally done stake Young Women's Camp every year. And there's an old way of doing girls camp and a new way of doing girls camp. And our stake had a lot of traditions with that when it came to like the levels and the years. And we always do this hike and we always do it this way. And so we kind of came in with new ideas. Well, this is from an old handbook. This is from an old, it needs to be YCL led and youth led. And how do we do that? And the first year was good. We learned a lot. And I think every year we were able to kind of introduce new ideas and act on them. But there was one young woman, I was friends with her mom, and she came to me and she said, oh, my daughter just has some questions about camp. And I was like, okay, well, let's go get some ice cream. So I went and got ice cream with this mom and this daughter. And she just told me what she was feeling about camp. She said, I feel like I want more to do. I feel like I want more input with the theme. I feel like I want more of this and more of that and more of this. And I want to feel like a leader. She was telling me all these ways that she was feeling like she didn't get to be the leader she in her mind had envisioned, and so I took notes and I wrote things down, and we had a whole year to kind of plan for the next camp. And so I took those thoughts into consideration. And then I kind of had that young woman help me just kind of spearhead the YCLs and the next year, and brought the state camp director in on it. And the state camp director is now the current state young women's president. So we're close and have worked together, and she was really good at having YCL lead. And so we were able to kind of to grow that, and it got better the next year. And then this past summer, the camp that we had was just so amazing. And the young woman and the YCLs were so amazing. And I felt like that young woman felt heard. And she brought her binder every summer and she wanted to be there. And she was so excited about camp, even though she was graduating, and she wanted to be there. And I just felt like I didn't change anything drastically, but I was able to hear her. And then I shared her voice with everybody else. And I gave her a place to come and continue to counsel and to continue to have ideas. And our camp process grew and was better because of that. And by the end of it, she was just so sad to leave girls camp. She was so invested, and she just like, I don't know what I'm going to do without girls camp. And I just thought, this is like, I feel like the youth are ready to hear like the hard things, and they're ready to answer the hard questions. And one question that we also learned in that general training was, they said, rather than asking the youth like, well, what do you want to do this week? Or what do you want to do for camp? And it's kind of like, that's kind of like a self-reflective question. Like, well, what's fun to me? Well, what do I want to do? What do I want to, so what sounds fun to me, right? And they said, you need to switch that question to like, how do you want to engage in God's work this week? Or who should we help this week with our activity? And I feel like that's what the youth crave. And I feel like that's what this young woman was craving. She wanted to teach a lesson. She wanted to bear testimony. She wanted to, so our questions changed to like, rather than, well, what sounds fun for young women's camp? It was, well, okay, how can we bring the young women closer to Christ at camp? And then just the revelation just exploded, and they just were so excited. And I feel like that's what they want. That's what they're ready for. They're ready for the questions that we as adults are always trying to answer and give to them. They want the question and they want to answer it, and they want to teach it. And so that was just a really cool experience to kind of go through that. Another experience is we held a trek in 2023. And trek, I feel like, is kind of like a love-hate relationship. It's,
really? Wow. Nobody else feels that
right?
way. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I feel like people are either really excited about it or like, this is outdated. Don't do it. This is dangerous. This is not great. And we hadn't had a great track record with treks in our stake. In 2019, we went on a trek. It was actually pretty cool. It was around Adirondack, but we got severe weather came through. We were in a barn for like 7 hours. We couldn't get out. And so like, we just didn't have a great track record with these things. And so we kind of felt like, well, we should do a trek, but how do we make it applicable? How do we reach the youth with this? How do we help kids who don't have pioneer heritage? How do we help, our Spanish word that they are from other countries? How do we help them feel like they have a pilgrimage or a pioneer type spirit? Or like, what do we do to like help these kids? And so with our stake youth committee, we just kind of asked questions, and we hate the clothes, or we don't like this, or, and so we kind of modified it. It was New Testament year. And we just did a different focus each day. So the first day was like Jesus time. So it was like New Testament era. So we wore like biblical clothing, and we talked about the New Testament. We talked about different things. And then the next day was Pioneer Day. So we were, we didn't make them be in like full pioneer gear. Wear whatever you're comfortable with, but dress like a pioneer, And then the last day, we all were modern day pioneers, and we wore our trek shirts, and we were the modern day pioneers hiking out. And the youth were involved. I mean, they designed the shirts, and they helped us write the devotionals, and they helped us with the little handouts, and they had like a stargazing activity, and they got ideas for talks, and they were just all involved in it. And they even dressed up at the fireside and announced things and made videos. And it was so much more impactful, I think, because they had such a say, and we tried to meet their needs. And I felt like whenever someone came to me with a question or a, hey, like, this is something I don't love. I don't love this aspect of this certain activity. I feel like there was always something we could do to like accommodate that, or be like, okay, well, let's try it differently. Let's think about this differently. How do you see it? What do you want to do? And we found some really awesome experiences, and we felt it was just really, we had a win for Trek that year. And so it really worked out well. And it was awesome. And I served with amazing women, and one thing we learned too is just ask questions. Ask questions, ask questions, ask questions. Don't ever assume you know how a youth feels. Don't ever assume you know how they're feeling or where their testimony is. Just ask questions, get to know them, have them tell you where they're at. Don't assume where they're at. And so just a lot of those interactions just built up over time. And I just thought, this is where the answer is. It's right here in these youth, because they're incredible. So,
and I imagine that the more they feel empowered, that, oh, they're actually listening to us. Like, I said that thing and now we're doing that thing, the more they'll probably speak up and say, actually, my opinion counts around here. Well, then I'll share it. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did see that, especially through Young Women's Camp, because I just felt like each year, the same Y sales were kind of around, and it was like, oh, they got used to that idea and they came forward with so many awesome things, and it made our
Hmm.
camp incredible. So, yeah, it was really great.
Awesome. All right, next principle is relationships matter.
It sounds so simple, and I find that like the most simple like ideas are sometimes the hardest ones to like really engage with. Like it really can't be
Yeah.
that easy, right? It can't. It really is that really going to make it easier if I focus on this rather than this thing that it's really pressing me? I feel like I have to get these things done and I have to check these things off and I have to buy all these special ideas or these special things for our activity. But really, I need to focus on the relationship. It's hard to put those things aside and focus on um, the most important thing sometimes. And it's a simple idea and it sounds simple, but it's for me, relationships in this calling made all the difference. I grew closer to my Savior, and like the women around me, I felt like I have best friends for life. Um, Sorry, I don't want to get emotional, but and then the youth just feeling like they're a part of something, and
Hmm.
just that relationship piece of and how it can just all be connected together. And it's all really just based on being there for each other and then coming closer to Christ. And he really is the one that forges all those things and makes those connections and just helps us grow. And he gives us each other to just strengthen us. And um, yeah, I just felt like if the relationships weren't there, we really couldn't get as far as we wanted to. And that was another thing, like first being called is especially in a time of such disconnection and kind of mistrust in the world and everybody, kind of worried about things. And it felt a lot like there was kind of a silo with, have the ward leaders over here and you have the stake over here and the stake's going to show up. And if the stake
Hmm.
shows up, we got to, be ready. We got to do things right. We don't want to get in trouble. And so I just remember feeling like I don't want anyone to ever feel that way. How do we bridge this gap? How do we build a bridge between like ward leaders and stake leaders and benefit from each other? And how do we, support these ward leaders so that they can show up because they're doing a lot of the hard work, right? These ward
Yeah.
leaders week in and week out and really trying to touch base with young women who, you're trying to love and serve and get to know. And that sometimes feels like the trenches. And so it's like, how do we as a stake show up um, as like we're here to listen, we're here to learn, we're here to support, we're here to love you, and we're not trying to oversee you or fix anything or change anything. We're just here to support you. And so that was something we really tried to do a lot was just building trust with adult leaders and kind of modeling and mentoring them in a way that we wanted them to then translate that for them to do for the young women. So it kind of just turned into this big like group of women who love each other and we're here to love the youth and we just want to be together, and that's really what it turned into. So
Yeah. Do any specific habits come to mind as far as how you made sure you were focusing on relationships? Because you can sort of get caught up in all the moving parts of these callings. That I mean, when you were you reaching out? Were you sending birthday cards? Were you going to their house? I
yeah,
mean, how did you go about actually doing that?
I mean a little bit of everything, but what I find interesting is like I said before, I tried to just look for patterns. What are patterns of like counseling? What are patterns of the way things are done? And what I noticed and what's so interesting is the same like layout in so the youth have like a sample agenda for their class presidency meetings. They're, it's online, it's in the training stuff. Here's your sample agenda if you're having a class presidency meeting, and it goes in order. And the first thing that it focuses on is ministering. So top of the agenda is ministering, and then we maybe talk about our lessons and things like that. And then we get around to our activities and it kind of goes in an order. And so for my presidency and I, we try to meet every week and we try to follow that same pattern. The first thing we focused on was ministering. Okay, where are we at with ministering? What do you know? What have you heard? What have you seen? What's going on? Who's out there? Who needs some help? And so that really helped a lot. And we were kind of spread across, different wards in our stake. And so we had, different friends, different associations. We were each in charge of 2 wards, which also helped logistically because we had 8 wards that we were over and there was 4 of us. And so we each just had 2 wards that were assigned to us. And we were like, we just let that ward know, like, if you need something, like, I'm your person. Like, you call me, I'll let you know. I'm going to stop by your class. I'm going to stop by your activity. I'm going to get to know these board leaders and these young women because, it's hard for one person or one presidency even to keep track of all these things. So dividing it up for us helped a lot. And so we always wanted to know what was going on in the ward young women's presidencies and like in their lives. Like one had a baby, so we brought her dinner. And it kind of was like, oh, you could tell it was like, oh, like not expected, right? Like you're coming by to bring me dinner. Like you don't ever hear from the steak people, right? So it's just kind of like
Yeah.
things like that. Someone was in the hospital, we brought her flowers. And so it was, and then also like, what are your concerns? What's hard for you in young women's and how can I support you? And how can I help you? And so that helped a lot. One year we sent out postcards handwritten postcards for Christmas. And then we had a lot of fun. We also did our own state young women's presidency Christmas card and sent it out to all the leaders that we worked with, whether it was high council or bishops and ward young women's presidents. And it's just like, here we are, we're here to love you, we're here to serve you. And as we continued to show up and kept trying and all those small and simple things, it really did build a lot of good relationships. It got to the point where there was a few wards that were really close with the counselor of mine that was over that ward, and they would call up and say, "Hey, we have these young women speaking in sacrament meeting today, and they wanted to let you know that she's going to be speaking if you want to come listen." So we'd show up and we'd listen, and oh, this young woman is speaking; she's leaving on her mission, so we would show up and we would listen, and that was really awesome to kind of just to keep being present, and that took time and effort, but we divided, we conquered, and we just spent a lot of time with them in their wards and their activities. And if they were short on someone, they knew they could call us and we could show up and help them out if we could. And just being aware of their struggles and different stuff like that, I think really went a long way. Like just building that trust, like, oh, you say these things and you're going to also do them. And I think that made a big difference. Anyone can say, well, I'm here for you if you need anything, just give us a call. But when we kept showing up, I think they started to believe us and they wanted to call us. They wanted to ask us for help. Another thing we did, I want to say that I maybe heard this idea on a podcast too. Maybe it was this podcast. I don't know.
We'll take the credit. Go ahead.
Right. Take the credit. But it was, we did every 6 months, we would hold a president's brunch. And so we would gather all the presidents, ward young women's presidents in the stake. And we'd have them come to a brunch our secretary was amazing and she was really good at planning events. And so she would have these amazing tablescapes and we would cook them food and we'd have breakfast and we would have Diet Cokes. We would have all the things that make you happy, like we're here to be happy, have a soda, have some food, and we're going to write down everything that's working for you. We're going to write down everything that's not working for you and want to hear about all of it. We want you to talk to each other. We want you to talk to us, and we're going to take notes. And also State Young Women's Camp is coming up. What are questions you have? Is their communication okay? Is this working? Is this not working? Is this helping your ward? Is this not helping your ward? And I think the more that they were like, okay, I'm like being heard, and I have a place that I can go and kind of figure this out and counsel, once again, counseling together. And it just really turned into a place where we could really solve a lot of problems together. Because first of all, we knew what they were, and then we knew that we were there for each other. And so it really just became a place where we like really just wanted to be together and gather as much as we could. And I think that's the power of and beauty of gathering, is you want to be there and you know that you're benefiting by coming together for a common cause. So it really turned out in a beautiful, beautiful way.
That's great. All right, this last principle, I probably was most excited to have you unpack this one. Here's what you sent me. The Lord does not ask us to serve so he can deplete us, test us, or for us to prove ourselves. All right, teach us. This is fantastic.
Well, so as I was being released, and first of all, I'm not here to fool anybody. Like, it was hard. This calling was really hard. It took up a lot of time, a lot of sacrifice. I didn't always get it right. I didn't always know what to do. Like, you feel inadequate. I think everyone feels inadequate when you're asked to lead or teach or speak. And I think that's part of the process, right? I think we have to just kind of embrace that in a way and be like, it's okay if I don't know everything. That's why I ask questions. That's why I have other people here to support me and also teach me. And kind of as my service was wrapping up, I kind of was just reflecting on these things that I'd learned. And I just felt like it was such a privilege to witness so many miracles and just to feel like I truly had been an instrument in God's hands, that I had done things that he needed me to do. And we had so we would do like a YCL retreat every year too, which was really cool. We would bring all the YCLs in the stake, and we kind of go and meet together and learn what it means to be a leader and get ideas for camp. And we did what's the word I'm trying to think of? Object lesson. There it is.
Mhm.
We were doing an object lesson, and as I was thinking about this principle, I thought about we were trying to teach them about camp, but I think this can apply really to any calling we have. And it's kind of a typical object lesson, but I just kind of took it a step further where, we had a glass jar and we put golf balls in it. We're like, golf balls, they're the main things you want to do, the main things you want to focus on, they're your purpose, right? We want to help people to come into Christ. We want to fill young women to feel like they belong. And, what is our plan for camp? What's our purpose for camp? These are our big things that we want to get. So we put those in our jar first. And then we put rocks in next. And then rocks were, kind of the fun stuff, like what does your t-shirt want to look like? What should we eat? Where should we go? What activities should we do? When should we do devotionals? Just kind of the logistical planning and the ideas. Those are kind of the rocks that we put in. And then we poured in some sand, and we're like, okay, here's some sand. Sand is like the gritty stuff. Like sometimes the not fun stuff. You're probably going to be tired. It's going to be hot. Camping in Kansas is not on my bucket list. It's muggy, and there's ticks and there's bugs, and there's going to be things that you don't love, and maybe you don't get along with somebody, or maybe it's just kind of, it takes time and it's hard. And so these are all the components of our camp, right? And then we took a jar of water, and then we poured the water in, and where this object lesson kind of changed for me was like, and here, this water represents Christ, right? The living water. And if we come with our best and we do our best and we put all these things in there, he will pour himself into this camp. He will come in and fill all those gaps that we can't see. He will reach those hearts that we're not even aware are being reached. He will help connect dots that we maybe didn't see. He will kind of just come in and fill and soothe and help all of this. And so I thought about that a lot, and just, I really felt that like in my service, and all that grittiness and all the hard stuff, and waking up early. I mean, there was some nights I was up till 2 a.m. preparing a talk. You're just exhausted. I had 3 of my own youth in the youth program, like going through the youth program. I got a missionary out the door. Like there was a lot going on. And so I just felt like, the scripture that talks about like, whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. And I just think the Lord always pays us back tenfold. And so kind of wrapping up my service and just like reflecting on this, I was asked to bear my testimony in state conference. And I just thought, well, what do I share? How do I encapsulate this experience? How do I share, what I learned? And one thing that we would say, which I think actually comes from President Emily Bell Freeman, because we love and adore her, but is she kind of said, here's a plan, and now are you ready? And so that kind of became our theme, like, okay, we're going to do this now. Are you ready? Are you ready for these exciting things ahead? And I really tried to pass that on to the next presidency as well. But some of the questions that I kind of shared in my testimony is, I just said, are you ready to feel the love the Savior has for you and for others? Or are you ready to make friendships that will last a lifetime? Are you ready to forget your own load for a minute and lift someone else's? Are you ready to learn so that you can teach? Are you ready to see things in a new light? Are you ready to gain confidence in yourself and your Savior? Are you ready to strengthen your testimony? And are you ready to know the Savior better than you did before? So that really came to me towards the end of my service, where I just thought, I've been blessed, and it's been a privilege to have this experience and to see and witness miracles, and to pray and act and expect good things to happen. And they did happen. And there was a quote from Elder Uchtdorf that I love that said, often the answer to our prayers do not come when we're on our knees, but while we're on our feet serving the Lord and serving those around us. So I feel like for me, like serving really took on a whole new meaning of like, this was not meant like for me to like cross the finish line and collapse. This was meant to make me better and meant to make me stronger. And it did. And I think, why else would the Lord want the youth to serve and to be in callings and to be leaders than to experience these same feelings, to feel like I have a community, I have a connection with heaven, I have a connection with others. I can be happier. I can be more like my Savior. I can know him better. I can understand maybe how to love better. And when we love better, we feel better. And so I think one thing we hear a lot, I think, in our church culture is, magnify your calling.
Yep.
What does that mean? Like magnify your calling. What does that mean? I think for some of us, it's like this, I have to be giving my all. I have to feel exhausted, or I have to do all these certain things a certain way. And just kind of for me, something I learned was like, I am not the magnifier. I'm not magnifying anything, you know, and all the good things that happened and all of the amazing things that were accomplished were because of him, because of our Savior. And I feel like he's the magnifier. He's the one that we all come closer to as we're working together on these things. And so we actually found a quote. It's from Elder Ballard that that we would use in our trainings. And it says that the instruction to magnify our callings is not a command to embellish and complicate them. To innovate does not necessarily mean to expand. Very often it means to simplify. And so we would kind of talk about that, with ward leaders who are maybe feeling burnt out, or, this is hard. This is not what I expected. I don't know what to do, and it's kind of like, well, simplify. We kind of added on also, like, it's not just to simplify things as in don't do anything or do less. It's maybe just to focus on the things that matter most. And that's like what we've talked about already, the relationships, the youth, the questions they have. How can we really address concerns? How can we truly minister? How can we truly mentor? How can we really lift people up where they are needing to be lifted? And so for me, it was just, I switched that idea in my head of magnifying my calling to, that's not me. I'm not here to like run this marathon alone. Like, Christ will walk with me. He will help me. He will teach me. And he's the one that magnifies all these efforts and makes them beautiful and makes them work. And I mean, to me, that's just a privilege. Like, I felt like he truly was my covenant companion, and just helping young women to feel that. And I think they first learn that from other people, right? From their parents or from other leaders. And then it's like, well, here, this is why I feel this way, is because the Savior, he magnified me and he'll magnify you. And I think that's why the Lord wants us to serve, and why he wants the youth to serve, is because that is how we truly come into him and really feel of what this is like to bless other people like he blesses us. So I think it's just a privilege to learn those things and to be able to be edified by them and strengthen myself, and just become better because of it. So
wow, Jodi, Stacy wasn't lying. All right. I'm so glad she reached out and you're willing to share your experience, because just like you've emphasized here, it's not that you figured it out or that you did it right or you didn't struggle, but that Christ was on this journey with you, and it was really a sanctifying process for you, right?
It absolutely was.
Well, I feel like you kind of ruined my closing question, but I'm going to ask it, and if there's anything else you can add, because you kind of just answered it, which is, how's being a leader helped you become a better follower of Jesus Christ? Anything else you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think for me, it allowed me the opportunity to be put in a place to really learn and to increase my ability to grow spiritually. And I think I had to search out things. I had to pray more. I had to do more. And another thing about the youth program that I think it was a podcast interview on like the church news or something. I think it was Sister Oscarson, who was a former General Young Women's president, or I think she was kind of involved in a lot of these changes. And the interviewer kind of said, like, well, this new For Strength of Youth, this new program, it's harder. Like, I have to pray more. I have to think more. I have to like get to know all of these things better. It's not just like a list that I can just say, here's the list. This is what you do. This is what you don't do. I have to really search and think and pray. And that, what really caught me off guard is she goes, isn't that great?
Yeah.
And I thought, it is great. And it was an opportunity for me to really, to search, to pray, and to learn. And, I learned more about my covenants. I learned more about Christ as my companion. Like I talked about, I learned more about, like, I'm a child of God. I'm a child of the covenant. I'm a disciple of Christ. I got to see that the Lord loves his youth. And, when you have youth and you have kids and you're trying to help and you just want the best for them, like, what greater witness is that? To know that, sorry, it really didn't, I cry a lot, and it was like, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. But I really was like, what better witness is that than to understand how much the Lord loves his youth, and that every effort is worth it. And it does take time and it does take extra prayer, but it made me better because I was able to engage in those same things of learning and growing and finding my own strength. And that was, like I said, all through the Savior, and that we could all do that together and kind of share that with each other.